is I love direct or driving for dollars. I mean, I really think that that's like a fun way to really learn about this, your city or where you're investing, finding contractors because there's a roll off in the front yard and the front door is wide open. Guys are walking in and out. You can get out, talk to them, get their card, see the work they're doing, see how clean they keep the job site. When everybody's trying to do the least amount of work possible and just like order a list and do some mailing where they don't have to touch anything, I think finding those ways produce better deals because most people aren't willing to do that long term.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. My name is Chad Carson. I'm your host for the show, which is all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and doing more of what matters. Whether you're a brand new listener or a longtime listener, it's great to have you back for another episode. The topic of today's episode is the ups and downs of a real estate investor's 18-year journey. This is an interview with Danny Johnson. Danny's an investor from San Antonio in Texas, and he's had really an interesting journey. He and I started at the exact same time in 2003. So during this conversation, we talk about those ups and downs, how he got started as a part-time investor. He had a full-time job as a software engineer and kind of how that worked and the different types of approaches he had to take to get deals done and to do things while he was working full-time. So that might be a common theme with a lot of you. But eventually he went full-time, and we talk about that and the different challenges of dealing with the Great Recession of 2008 and 9 and the different ways we both adapted, which might be applicable to some of you just thinking about the future as markets change. And then we also got into different business models, go big and have a big team versus staying small, which you know is kind of one of my approaches of having a small business that's efficient, that makes enough money so you can do more of what matters. So we go back and forth on that a little bit and then talk about the psychological game of real estate and entrepreneurship, which is so seldom talked about, but we both agreed has been a common challenge for me, for other investors. How do you overcome some of the fears you have, some of those next steps, which are often even more difficult than some of the tactics. So we get into that and then finally wrap up with a lot of talk about deal finding in 2021. What are some of the common themes that people who are finding deals and going off market particularly, what are they doing to track their leads and kind of build an operation that'll help you have a competitive advantage in 2021? So all of those are topics we cover in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Before I get started with the main topic of today's episode, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player or on YouTube if you're listening to the podcast on YouTube. I have new episodes that come out every Monday morning, so you don't want to miss anything, and that'll notify you each time an episode comes out. And then finally, if you like this show, we always appreciate you leaving a review on Apple Podcasts to show your support. And as a way of saying thank you to those of you who do leave a review, I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, each week to one person who left a review. So please keep listening all the way to the end of the episode for this week's winner. Now let's get started with today's interview with Danny Johnson. Hey, Danny, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, so this is going to be fun. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I think from what I've read, Danny, you and I started probably about the same time, 2003. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about the markets we've been through, the 2003 run up all the way to 2007 and 8 when I had to kind of hold on for dear life through the recession. I'm not sure how that worked for you as well, but all the way back to now. And so I thought it'd be cool to start just from what I've read and what you've got going on right now. You've had different journeys through your real estate investing career. You've been a software developer. You've done a lot on that kind of side of the real estate business. But lately it seems like you've jumped right back into flipping, which is, I know, a big part of what your brand has been about, flipping junkie and finding deals. So I'd be curious to hear just from your personal perspective, having done it since 2003, what's it been like? Tell us that story of getting back into buying houses in 2021.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, things have changed quite a bit, but that's what the only certainty is change, right? That nothing will actually stay the same. So
right.
It is interesting to go back and see. My father started flipping houses when I was in college, and when I was growing up, he was a contractor for a real estate investor. So I got to experience what it was like to go into junkie homes and do demos, because I would help him clean out demos and stuff like that. And in college, he started working for and learning from one of that same investor he was doing a lot of the remodeling for when I was growing up. And so I graduated college with a computer science degree, and I was doing software development and stuck in a room all day long, and my dad was out having fun buying houses. And so I was like, man, I just got the itch. I just, he had me read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read that, got super pumped, excited, and, just jumped in the business and was part-time for 3 years. And I guess when you and I, somebody like you or I shares our story, we're talking about 2003 to today. That's a lot of time, right? And so it can seem like we just chose to and then did it, right? And then we were just cranking, we were going, but how much did we have to go through to get there? So I was part-time for 3 years. I had to be fired from my job to go full-time because that paycheck, man, it was just hard to say goodbye to a steady paycheck.
It's like that golden handcuffs, right? We all have that security. It's hard to let go of that.
Yeah. So it was really, really, even though I was losing money at that point because I was doing a good enough amount of deals to where I could be doing more deals had I been full time. But it was interesting because that transition was kind of hard because, the part-time, doing the business part-time forced me to really focus on the 80-20. I've only got so much time. What is it that I need to do? Instead of, whenever I went full time, I was kind of freaked out a little bit because I was thinking I got all this time to fill and just too many things, too many opportunities, too many ideas. And, it no longer was, what do I need to do next? It was, what can I do? All these things. And you just start doing so many different things that don't really move the needle much.
Right. Yeah, it's a different kind of problem time management wise. So when you were part-time, you had, here I have 10 hours a week. How can I get the most of it? And you kind of forced your hand a little bit. You had to focus.
Right. And try something and say, okay, well, that's not producing results. Let me try something else, find the thing that produces results, and then keep doing it and don't stop. Because I know it works. I don't have time to check out other stuff. So it really forced that. So I'm really grateful to have spent so long part-time. And it was completely doable. I mean, after a while, I got kind of old having to go on my lunch breaks to check on rehabs and stuff like that. But, we still did it because it was still super exciting to do the deals. Fast forward, we had the market crash in 2007, 2008. And we had to, my mentors and different people I looked up to in the business were saying there's no shame in getting a job again. And I was thinking, man, I'm not employable at this point. I cannot go back to a job. I refuse. Like, I'll figure out what I have to do. But, and thankfully things did pop up. There were opportunities that came, and, that didn't happen until it had to happen. But I had always stuck to my guns as far as being real conservative in my numbers, right? So when some people were saying the market's so red hot through 2005, 2006, they were paying way more than they probably would have otherwise, right? And so with the market correction then, they were kind of in a bad spot. But since I had always stuck to my guns on buying, at 70%, it really wasn't that much. And also I was in Texas, which fared fairly better than many places.
Right.
But we did have to adjust because, getting, it wasn't so easy to get a loan. Even the appraisers, everybody was really shy about putting values on properties and all kinds of things because nobody knew where it was going to end up, right, as it went down.
Yep.
And it was cool because this is where the creative side of real estate comes in. It's like, what do you do in a situation like that? The easy thing was to make the purchase amount smaller, right? Like, we'll go 65% of whatever the ARV is at this moment and do that. And that really worked well, but it was really difficult for the end buyers to get loans to buy the houses. So, things were sitting on the market. You have a lot longer holding time. It was cool because we started doing a thing where we would sell on owner financing. And so that solved that problem. We could sell really quick because a lot more people couldn't get a bank loan at that point, but we could finance them at a higher interest rate. And then at the day of closing, we could sell the note at a discount. And people were paying like 93% and things like that, like of the note value, right? So if the value is a little bit higher because we're selling it with owner financing, what we're selling it for is a little bit higher, then we sell it at 93%. We're still making the same kind of money we were selling retail and having bank financing for the end buyers. So that worked out really cool. And we did keep some of those during that time, the owner finance notes. And looking back, I really wish I kept all of them, and then some rental properties and things like that. So And I only bring up that a little bit more in the part of the story right now, because who knows what's going to happen with the market, right? And there could be changes. And, it's not that real estate investing, house flipping, wholesaling goes away. It just looks different.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing I'm taking from your story. And I had the exact same scenario. We were flipping. We also had rental property, but we were mostly kind of plan A flipped. And then, 2007, 8, and 9 happened, and we owner financed a lot. I mean, we had to, and it's not like that one pivot is just affects one part of your business. It affects how you buy the houses, how you finance them on the front end. So it really is a big pivot, but we did the same thing. And we used the whole down payment assistance program that was offered by the federal government at that point, the cash for first time home buyer kind of thing. And yeah, it's so I like your point though. Like none of us really knew, even though I was pretty young in the business, you were as well, but none of us know what happens next. So you got to be, sounds like you're making the point of being nimble. You have to be prepared to adapt and change, and buying properties at lower values is part of that nimbleness, I guess, right? I mean, buying good deals is always going to help you pivot no matter what happens next.
Right. And it's an interesting thing too, when the market's great, right? It's kind of harder to find deals, and it's so easy to sell them. Mm-hmm. And then when it's the opposite, it's hard to sell them, but it's easier to get them because there's not as many investors competing with you. So it just looks different, right? I mean, it's all about how we're perceiving the whole situation and whether we want to go to the negative side of that view, or if we want to take the positive side of it and go with that. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it keeps things interesting, right? Like the things get kind of old when you have it dialed in and you're just cranking and finding it difficult to go beyond where you're at. But so anyway, we made it through that. And at this time, this first 8 or 9 years in the business, my ex-wife and I were running everything. We were wearing all the hats. And for a big part of that, I was pretty much almost doing most of it up to the point of selling it. And that's a recipe for burnout over time. Yep. Because you have a certain level of success, and that feels great. And you say, I want more success. Let me just do more of what I'm doing. And then just putting in more hours and, putting in more work. And that's not really sustainable. I mean, it gets to be pretty painful. And I realized that when I started taking phone calls, I was always taking phone calls, but whenever I was taking a phone call in a car or something, and then my wife would, after I got off the phone, would say, you do realize that you were being kind of rude to the seller. Like you were just kind of like rushing the whole conversation, and, it's not like you. I was like, man, I'm at the point where I'm just doing too much and I'm not handling it properly. And so this whole idea, I'm going to work harder and have more success, actually ends up doing the opposite. Right? Like it just actually ruins what you even had going, because you try to get to another place from this place you were, when you had to really change your whole perspective of the whole thing.
Right.
And, for a new person, I think that's maybe something to really consider and keep at the back of your mind, because there probably will come a time where, unless you're okay with just doing like 6-10 deals a year and having more of a lifestyle and making a good amount of money. But for most entrepreneurs, I don't think that's enough, right? It's the whole excitement of really going after something that keeps us going. So
let's actually talk about that. I think that was one of the notes I wanted to ask you about, because it seems like you've had different business models. You've flipped a lot of houses, and I want to go back to the difference between flipping and renting and some of that. But then also this distinction between kind of a small lifestyle business and a more professional operational kind of flipping houses and or renting, but I think there's a divide there. And if you listen to Bigger Pockets on the podcast there, you'll see all sorts of different scale of investors. And I'll kind of put out on the table what my own bias has been and own approach. In 2007, we had 33 closings, acquisition closings. We had the deal machine going. We were doing a lot of marketing. We basically did a 180. Like we said, this is not for us. Like, we don't want the staff. We don't want the operations. We don't want the overhead. And we've been, ever since then, a really lean business. Mm-hmm. And we are in that, 5 to 6, 7 kind of per year. But then on the other hand, I know there's nothing wrong with going either path. And so I'm just curious to you, like, if you look back on it, which have you done a little bit of both of those? Have you which one of those have you kind of taken and run with?
So 8, 9 years, we kept it that way for a long time. And it was the idea, because, it was also developing friendships with people that were doing the bigger organizations. And there is this idea of competition and feeling like, wow, I haven't gotten to that level.
Right.
It's almost like this whole path of a real estate investor. The path is anything you want to make it, right? But there's a path that you're like kind of like grow up to believe, right? So it's the path of high school and college and getting the job and having insurance and buying a house and all that kind of stuff. But it could really be whatever you want it to be. And in real estate investing, it's kind of like wholesaling, maybe getting to rehabbing, if that's what you want to do, and then growing, and then maybe even go into multiple markets, or, get to where you're doing the 100 deal a year kind of thing, and you got a team. And we didn't go to the team for a long time because I was afraid of responsibility of having a team, like having, it's like I didn't go to business school. I really knew nothing about business. It was kind of weird operating the business and, hearing people say you're a business owner. It's like, I don't feel like I am not a business owner, right? I'm doing something fun. This is kind of like a hobby. And I think there does need to be a maturing into an understanding of business over time, because it will lead to burnout and making mistakes because you're trying to keep it as something like a hobby. Right. And I think that's where some of the frustration came in. It's like, I'm supposed to be having this lifestyle, but I'm working really hard and I have to be here to do all this stuff and that responsibility. So bringing on the team, it was like, if we bring on a team, then we can't leave for 2 months on a vacation like successful real estate investors do, right? Like this whole idea that travel and, do whatever you want, all that kind of stuff. And while your money works for you, but it's like when you're doing all those things yourself in the business, the money's not really working for you. You're still working for the money, right? It's still a job, and that responsibility. And it was interesting because it was like, if we hire a team, then we have to make sure things keep going. But we had to do that anyway, right? If I took a week-long vacation, it was still kind of painful because the day I'd leave, I'd get a call for a hot deal and I'd be like, oh man, who else is going to go to put it under contract? It's only me.
Yeah. And
that stressed me out. And then being on vacation, having to check my phone, try to be on top of what's going on was also stressful. Like all those stops into the business center at the hotels, right? To get signed paperwork back and handle closings and all kinds of stuff going on, which for some people, they get fired up over that kind of stuff and are okay with that on vacation. But after a while, I wanted to really
check out. Yeah. You don't want to have, no, I'm with you on that. You're sitting at the pool, you're on a hike somewhere and having to go back and sign paperwork for a deal. And then the computer doesn't work correctly and you're scanning something from the Magellan Strait in South America. I've done that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. No fun.
Yeah. It kind of ruins that. So we did, start operating where we brought on an acquisitions person. And I think the first one was my brother-in-law at the time. So it wasn't like this formal hiring or anything. It was more of like, he had already been to some houses with me and was interested in the business and all that kind of stuff. But we ended up growing a team and operating like a true business. And that did give me the freedom to really focus on software, which is my other passion, right? So it's like real estate, software, and then aviation, flying. So those 3 passions. And having that team allowed me to be able to have the time to do the other things. And really have more fun in the entrepreneurial side of working on the business. That was a lot of fun doing that. And, we can go back at any point and talk about any of these points, but I've since even transitioned from the big team, went through a divorce and everything. And then, back to, like you were saying, I'm not trying to do a ton of deals. I'm actually focused more on my software right now, but I do generate leads and I do deals. And I'm looking for long-term stuff. I'm looking for long-term, like rentals is what I'm basically collecting at this point.
Well, let's talk about that too. Like a big part of my podcast is, and there's so many different paths, and which is I love. That's why I'm asking these questions. I love the different nuance and the different richness of the different financial independence paths. But I do want to step back from that and say, let's assume that we all have a pretty similar goal of eventually building up this portfolio of wealth that whether we decide to keep working or not keep working, it could support us. It could produce that passive income. That's a pretty common goal of a lot of investors, right? The path of taking, let's go back to that, the big business path versus the small investor, the mom and pop who flips 5 or 6 houses per year, even 2 or 3 houses, keeps a couple of rentals. I'm just wondering, both of those are viable paths, but now you've chosen kind of do the focus on your software. You're an entrepreneur and just do this other investing on the side. What's the reason for that? And you've already done the other path. Like what are the pluses and minuses, I guess, from the way you're looking at it?
Yeah, so the side of it is creativity, and the pluses for me for doing software for real estate investors, I still get to interact with real estate investors. It's my, including those two passions together into the one thing. So it's the idea of creativity. And the path of that, I guess I'm thinking of a story too, where, I sat down with my real estate mentor about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point, for lunch, and we were just discussing different things. And I don't even think that this really fit into the conversation in any way, but somehow it just appeared during the conversation. But he was talking about when Homevestors franchise started. And he was talking to the founder of Homevestors at a lunch. And he specifically came from Dallas down to San Antonio to meet with my mentor and talk about this opportunity to become one of the first franchisees. And, my mentor was telling me that he was talking with him. The guy, he had pushed over the whole systems and the whole notebook and all the processes and all that kind of stuff, because it's basically, the franchise model. And, my mentor pushed it back over and said, "I'm not interested." And he was kind of shocked. He said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Where's the creativity in this? Like, where's my part in this? Like, I'm just operating this thing based on these rules and this kind of stuff. And where's the fun in that, right? Like, what is, it's great to take something and operate from it knowing it's a proven model. But there is this part of being an entrepreneur where it's like the fun of finding challenges and facing those challenges, come up with creative solutions and doing that. Like, that becomes the fun part of it. And so I think I bring up that story mainly because it just came to mind, but also because it's the reason for going into the software side of things too, is because, having done everything ourselves for so many years in the business and then growing the team, operating that for a while. And you're right, the overhead does increase and you have to be on top of it. And, it gets to the point where it's like, well, what's next? Like, where I want to challenge myself and I want to succeed at something new and also do, have something that opens up a lot more possibility for, challenges and growth at the next level for me. And so that's why I went into the software.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I've had this mindset. I read a book recently by Cal Newport, which was So Good You Can't Ignore Me. They can't ignore you. And it was about being a craftsperson, like a craftsman or a craftswoman, and whatever you do, and how a lot of financial independence comes from. And he didn't describe it as such, but he described it basically saying when you become a craftsperson and you go all in on the creativity and the fun and the just going deep on that, to where you're not just trying to do it for a year or two. You're like, this is a lifetime commitment to being a craftsperson, and you love it. And you do that. You never want the path to end. Like you always continue doing it. And I sort of look at real estate like that for me. It's not my full-time thing even today. Like I have rental properties, but I like deal making. I like putting a deal together here and there, and I like going deep on it. I like learning. And so I think that's important for people to ask when they get into real estate. Like if you're looking for the Homevestors, here's the folder, everything's automated for you. Like, that's cool. Like, but I would say just go buy like a S&P 500 index fund if you want the whole thing automated. That's like the ultimate automation, Just get something that's completely passive and let all those managers of 4,000 businesses in the S&P or in the the total stock market index or something run it. Yeah. If you want to be an entrepreneur, like pick some business. If you're a software developer, if you're a real estate flipper, if you're a property manager, like you've got to love this business. Otherwise, you're not going to really get good at it, become that craftsperson. And so I'm kind of hearing that from you too, that you've done it. You've done the automation and having the team and stepping back. And now it looks like you're kind of getting back into your passion a little bit, but in a smaller way where, hey, 5 or 6 deals, cool. Like that's still fun, and I can do it part-time, and I'm still a craftsperson.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And also, I think I want to say too, I mentioned about like home investors and anybody listening and considering home investors, it seems like a great company. I've never been a franchisee, but, and it's not, you just have to follow this. So I want to make sure that that's clear. I think I've had somebody respond to me before and say, hey, home investors isn't like that. Well, you took it that way, but it's not. I mean, there's some freedom in there. So I don't
I'm not bashing home investors either. Yeah. I've got friends who run franchises, and they actually do a lot of work. So it's not all, it just depends on how much work you want to do, right?
Right. But yeah, in having that fun and the passion and creating, and I also see it as a way to give back, right? Because there's a lot of things that I'm doing now that I'm realizing and having hindsight on what kept me playing small in certain areas, playing small in the real estate game for a while, for 8 or 9 years, doing everything. Like what was my mindset, right? Because getting into the business required a different mindset from when I was out of college and working a job. That was very scary to me. I was very introverted, very shy, and talking to sellers, because I did mostly motivated seller marketing. I mean, I tried to do the listed properties thing because I didn't want to meet with people. And it was like, that did not work. I mean, the market was too hot. And so I had to go into that. So it forced me to grow and change mindset to even get into business and take risk. And I feel like looking back that there were times in the business where I kind of felt like I made that growth and I made those changes and I was good. And it was like, it wasn't necessary for me to keep pushing or to keep challenging myself, right? I got comfortable and kind of wanted to stay there, but that's not seen until there's some hindsight. So it's an interesting thing to always be, I mean, you hear it all the time, right? You got to keep growing. But I mean, I think a lot of us are probably stuck in different areas of our lives that we need to probably take an honest look at. And I enjoy looking at that side of things, right? Looking at what kind of fears are we facing? And I just started a new podcast too, that's centered around this. And I called it Braver because there's what's his name? Jordan Peterson. Do you know who that is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he had a conversation I listened to where he was talking about facing fears. And in clinical psychology, clinical studies or whatever, they're saying that fear doesn't really go away. It's not that you become fearless where you don't have fear. The fear is there. It's just that we become braver. And he said that when you voluntarily look at those things that you're afraid of, that you're avoiding, and all those kinds of things, and you decide to take that on, it's like a call to action, call to adventure, right? You're voluntarily facing that stuff, looking at it, and charging at it. And then if you're not, you're kind of shrinking and protecting yourself because you're just trying to avoid. And we're either doing one or the other, right? And so it's kind of a thing of, you can't just ignore it because you're not really ignoring it. There's no way to ignore it.
Right. You're pushing it down. You're psychological terms, you're pushing it into your subconscious, and it's going to come out in all sorts of other weird, distorted ways.
Right.
The monster in the closet kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful for whatever stage in real estate investing anybody listening is in. But if you're new, you're probably dealing with this. I mean, you know what your fears are, right? Like there's some things. And so going from that to what do you do? And it's interesting because this all came up very clear to me. I love having conversations with people and noticing things within them. And I guess, you as a coach, I'm sure you see this too. You see things in other people that it's so obvious for you to see, but I love taking a look at that and saying, wow, I see that so obviously in this person, but that's really just a reflection of me that I'm not noticing, right? Like I'm seeing it because it is me, and I had this conversation to make that a very specific example. I had a conversation with the guy that owns the gym that I work out in, and it's a small gym. It's just right down the street from my house. And he's been struggling to grow this gym. And so after the group workout the other day, I was stretching. I was the last one there just talking to him. And, he was talking about how society, how he's struggling with, growing the gym and making ends meet, especially after, COVID and all that kind of stuff and having to shut down for a while. And he was talking about how society, how the problem with people not wanting to work out and people, it's just, being overweight and all this kind of stuff and societal problems. And I was like, okay, you were just talking about the trouble with trying to grow your gym, and then you go straight into this huge generalization of society as a whole. It's like you're not trying to get all of society into your gym. You don't need to, right? So what is it like? Who is the person that you want to that you should be targeting to grow your gym? You don't need everybody. Who's the person that you need? It's like, well, there's people. And I said, well, let's take an example of me, because I worked out in my garage for years and years. It was only like 3 or 4 years ago I started working out at a gym, and I didn't even know I had that problem, right? There was something better. I was working out in my gym, in my garage, 5 a.m., with all the car parked right there, making sure I didn't hit it and all kinds of stuff, and doing exercises wrong and all those kinds of things. I'll try to make this quick, but and then I found this and it was actually across the club across the street from my house, so it was like I was avoiding that forever. But as soon as I did it, I just fell in love with working out with other people. The workouts went super fast. They were always varied. I didn't have to come up with a workout. Like all of that stuff was just super nice. And I'll never go back to working out alone in my garage again. Mm-hmm. And I said, those are the people you should be looking for. They already work out. It's not like getting them to work out is going to be the hard part. It's just showing them how nice it is to work out with a group of people, a small group of people. And why don't we focus on that? And where this all fits into everything is he got excited about that, right? Like you could see the light bulbs going off, but then almost immediately it just shut down. Like the face went flat again, and then starts coming out with these yeah buts. Yeah, but this, yeah, but, and going back into generalizations, like, whoa, what's happening with this? So I didn't say anything, I just kind of like, all right, man, well, cool. Talk to you later, and we'll keep talking about this or something, and left, and was just like thinking about that. It was like, what's going on there, right? It's like he got excited, he knew where to go, but then all of a sudden, like this whole pull to safety happened, right? That call to adventure was there, but this like fear popped up, and then it came like here these comfortable statements keeping you safe again, right? Here's all the reasons why I don't need to get out there and try to do marketing or promotion and all that kind of stuff. And so it was interesting.
So it really wasn't, it sounds like to me, that the technique or the solution itself was not the biggest obstacle. It might have been in his head, but it was that gap in him. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's like just taking the leap. Like that's fear. That goes back to your fear conversation. Like that's scary. Like doing this something that you haven't done in ever, or that you might fail. What is it that, you don't have to use him as an example, but what is it in ourselves that we're afraid of? Like what in those kinds of situations, what are we afraid is going to happen that we won't step out and be that entrepreneur, take that chance, do that thing that we're.
I think it's because we don't know what's going to happen. That's the whole thing. Like we, and I guess looking back at my, so that I don't put words in his mouth either, because I don't really know what drove that within him, something within him. But for me, looking back, because I did look back, because I wanted to say, if we reversed that, and I was on that end and I did that, like how would I progress through that? And so I want to talk about that, because I think it was like really good to see, and I want to share that with other people. But for me, the fear of the unknown in that case could relate to the same thing with real estate investing and marketing, right? Because it's the same situation, right? We're just trying to get people to find people that need to sell their house or want to sell their house quickly. And so it's this fear of, well, I sent out 1,000 letters and I got 3 calls and they were all pissed off and they didn't want me to call them. I didn't get anybody calling saying they wanted to sell their house. And so I spent, several $100s on that. And I'm afraid that if I do that again, I don't have that much money. I'm going to, be throwing money again into this black hole, and that scares the hell out of me. I don't want to do it. And so who knows, like that kind of thing could be coming up, right? I tried something, it didn't work. So if I try this other, am I just doing more of that? And it's scaring me. And then even if people do call, I'm scared because what am I going to do? What if I screw it up? What if I offer too much and, lose money on a deal? There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, how do we get past this, right? Because it seems pretty daunting. It seems like a scary situation, like a for sure scary situation. I mean, the first time I got a house under contract from a motivated seller, I got the contract. My hand was shaking like crazy, filling that thing out and signing it. And I took it to the title company. And believe it or not, I was in the parking lot at the title company. I had to call my dad and say, what am I supposed to say when I bring this in there? I didn't even know what I was supposed to do at that point. Like, I didn't know that you would go in and, you should find a title person, an escrow agent, or somebody that works with real estate investors beforehand. But the reason why I bring that point up right now is that a lot of us will spend a lot of time in the safe comfort zone of learning. I don't know how to do this part of it, so I need to learn that, right? I need to know that before I do anything. We're really, a lot of times, that's all just bull crap. Like the reason, and I'm glad I got into this business when I was younger, because I was so dumb. I did not realize that I should probably know what to say or find a title company person before I even put it under contract, which is good, because what I did was the important thing that got me to the point of getting a contract. Right. And so all those steps up to that point. So this takes us back to what to do, right? In that situation where I'm afraid to put the marketing out there because of what might happen, the unknowns. And I want to go to these familiar stories that keep us comfortable and keep us playing small, of there's too much competition and the market's changed. The market might crash. I shouldn't do anything. And saying, well, what we're afraid that's happening. We're having those conversations to feel okay with ourselves and not doing something. But we feel that way because we know we're capable of it and we're not doing it. Right? And so how do you move beyond that? And it's really about, first, number one, accepting that that's happening. Acceptance, right? Acceptance of, I feel scared as hell. I don't know what I'm doing for the most part. I don't know what's going to happen. And being okay with that. It's normal. It's absolutely normal. Don't try to say I'm not scared and I shouldn't be scared, because then all you're doing is shaming yourself and starting that whole spiral, right? Like it's kind of like, accept the fact that you are and be okay with that. Become braver, right? Mm-hmm. Don't think that you should not have the fear. We all have it. I'm somewhat nervous even having this interview with you right now. I mean, I get that way, but we'll do it anyway, right? Just do it anyway. So we recognize that we're having that situation. We accept it. We're okay with it. And that's not easy either, but that's all you can do. It's like, just accept it, be okay with it. Over time, it becomes easier. And then we are clear-minded enough to say, what is the next thing that I need to do? I don't need to worry about all the other stuff. Right now, at this moment, what's the first thing that I need to do? Just the one thing. What's the next thing? And then I can worry about the next one after that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in between there, Danny, that this is so good. I think that first step, accepting, I'm just going to go back to that and validate what you're saying, how difficult that is for all of us. And I'm going to tell it, my wife is a foreign language teacher, and part of our journey has been learning foreign languages. And she's found that when she's teaching people foreign languages, and this is very similar to real estate, because this is this big monster of a learning problem. And adult learners, people like us, when we're first starting, you're 30, 40 years old, trying to learn a foreign language, the biggest obstacle we have is making ourselves look like a fool. You're going to look like an idiot when you first. I mean, think about a baby when they're 1 year old or two. They sound ridiculous, right? We're all, oh, that's so cute. They sound so ridiculous. But when we're 40 years old, trying to sound ridiculous, learning a language, we are terrified of that, because it seems so ridiculous for us to do that as an adult. And so that lack of being willing to look like an idiot is the problem itself. And it's so similar to real estate investing, because we all start as beginners. Like, we're all brand new. None of us know what to do with the contract once we get, at some point, we learn it. Either we read it in a book, or we have a mentor, or we ask somebody or listen to a podcast. So I'm just validating what you're saying. I think this is a common problem, and that we kind of should on ourselves and say, hey, we should know how to do this. We should do this. And rather than to say, you know what, we're all beginners. Like, this is okay. I'm willing to look like an idiot a little bit. And then just doing that next thing, instead of trying to figure out every single step for the next 20 steps. Like, that's another form of trying to solve that fear, because you're just afraid that you're not going to know what to do at step 15. but really all you need to do is step 3. So I love that. I think that's such a breaking it down in that way is so common to our process of learning as people, but specifically with real estate investing. I see that a lot too.
Yeah, I love that you bring it up. And actually, I just typed it out. I wanted to remember that because I think you're right. I think we don't want to look like an idiot. And I think a lot of that drives this whole, complication of doing things that we're not used to doing. Yeah, that's interesting because recently in my life, I realized that, at some point I kind of stopped being spontaneous and I was worried about looking like an idiot. And, some of that's getting out there a little bit more into the public eye is like having a podcast and stuff. But,
that'll make you feel vulnerable, right? Talk about, man, putting myself out there on the podcast and YouTube. I mean, so I get nervous as well, but this is, the first few times I asked my wife, like I was like sweating in my bed. Like, I can't believe I just put that out to the world. I'm going to be, I don't know, people are going to scream at me. It was ridiculous, but yeah, I'm with you on that.
And one of my fun things to do, one of my favorite things lately has been, so my daughter just turned 13. One of my daughters just turned 13. And I love embarrassing her. And what I mean by that is I love doing things in public that I just feel like doing and don't care what people think, right? But it embarrasses her because she's not used to me doing that, right? Or being around somebody that would do something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm a goofy person. Like I'll just do goofy stuff sometimes. And so I don't know, it's just like it's finding that spontaneity again within myself too. So it's fun, but I think you do have to get past the whole worrying about what you look like. And that goes along with that, not wanting to look like an idiot keeps us from doing, so many things in our lives. And most of the time, nobody really even gives a crap. Like they're worried about how they look and don't even care about what other people look like. Right. So,
that's right.
Or what they're doing or whatever. But so that's a lot of pretty deep into moving through obstacles.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we went there. I think, I spent a lot of time on the show talking tactics, and I do want to get into some tactics here in a moment, but I think this is important. I mean, we're two people who've been in the business for a while. We've had our ups and downs, but this is the inside game, the mental game, and fear in particular is ever present every single day. Like I always think, like as an entrepreneur, like I think we're just people who are used to, we have the fear muscle has been built up. We're like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of like fear muscles, like because we fail all the time, we look like idiots all the time. Like and that's if you don't like that. I mean, if you're not, I always tell people if you want to buy a lot of properties, you're going to have to get used to that kind of getting rejected, looking like an idiot. That's just part of the game. And if that's scary, like if that's just like a non-starter for you, you might as well just know that up front and go do something else. Like, cause there's other paths you can invest, press a button and buy index funds, like I talked about earlier, and do whatever job you're doing now. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to go this path, you're going to have to deal with that. And the upside is that it's a personal growth experience, as you've talked about. I mean, it's something you'll get better at, and it'll help you in all sorts of other contexts, including embarrassing our daughters and doing that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, and I heard somebody say something at one point about, the times in our lives that we look back and remember are the times where we were scared of doing something and we did it. If we weren't scared, we don't tend to remember those moments.
Right.
Right, like there's these key moments. And this just goes back in this whole thing of where do you want to be when you look back? Do you want to regret, or do you want to have like look back and all that kind of stuff? But anyway, if you want to talk about tactics, we can talk about something that, do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, well, I do want to, I really always like to go to the fundamentals. And I feel like somebody like you've done thousands of transactions. And I think it would be helpful. I think there's a fear block in a lot of people's head right now, at least in my audience, of, hey, I'm here in 2021. It's a hot market. It's competitive. And like we're all going to acknowledge that, right? And so whatever they're doing is not working. They're getting bids on a lot of properties and they're losing out on properties. And so I think there's a paradigm shift, which you got pretty early on, and which I also had to do, of saying you've got to go out and create your own deal flow, and you've got to create your own funnel of opportunities. And this is specific to real estate investing, but this is really common in any business, entrepreneurship. So I was wondering if you could maybe just talk about the fundamentals of that, of this idea that if you want to create opportunities, in this case, buying good deals, that's the short point of the funnel. Like that's the part that we're all having hard times with right now. Like what are the fundamentals of creating opportunities for yourself? Whether it's like a funnel, whether it's the idea that you've got to go out and hunt where other people aren't hunting? Like, is there anything that comes to mind for you just to help people kind of get past that hurdle a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I really believe that it absolutely is a numbers game. And you may have heard that before, but I think really living the understanding that it is a numbers game. And what I mean by living that is measuring, right? I heard it for a long time. I ignored it because I was just busy. It was a hobby, so I didn't want to do it. But you can't manage what's not measured, right? And I think everything needs to be looked at this way. And even though it seems to be a little bit more work, ends up being far less work in the long term. And I want to preface everything that I'm talking about with this whole setting up your funnel and getting deal flow with that, because I think that that's really what separates the people that have success in this business, whether it's, doing 6-10 deals a year or, doing 40-50 deals a year. I think that they know these things, they know these numbers, or at least in their head, they have this running tally of what's worked, because it's all about finding the thing that you like to do, or at least, can do to bring in things that produce the good numbers, and then sticking with that because it's working, and then trying to do more and become the best at it. So myself, it was online, it was SEO game, it was getting organic rankings and then doing PPC on top of that to generate most.
Pay-per-click. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Just pay-per-click advertising is PPC for those of you who are kind of new to the online world.
Right. So that became my thing. Just, software was my thing. SEO was just kind of in line with that, being online, doing stuff with code and whatever, which SEO doesn't typically involve code, but it helps if you can do that or have somebody that does that kind of thing. So that became my thing. I focused on that. That became where I spent most of my time and energy, of setting up that to really produce for me. And it still does to this day. Other people, it's direct mail, right? My friend Don Costa, he's all about direct mail. Whenever I was going around trying to tell people about online's better, saying direct mail's dead, he's like, no, it's not. It's working for me. But some people will say it's dead because they experienced something that didn't work out. And instead of, getting to, it will work. It's like a diet thing, right? It's the thing that all diets work, right? It's not that you didn't find the right one. It's just the people won't do the work and live the diet long enough to actually make it work, right? So it's the same thing with marketing. It's like most marketing works. You just have to do the work and know what your numbers are, right? And know how to do it and get it to where it does better. So if you're doing direct mail, choosing a list and trying that, recording the numbers, seeing what happens with it, and then making adjustments, right? If that one didn't work out, or having a little bit of education where you can find out that, okay, we'll never base a list on the first mailing and saying it was either good or bad based on that first mailing, right? Because it usually takes 3 or 4 at least times before you really start to get the full picture of the numbers of what's happening with it. Because one letter from a person that's never gotten a letter from you before, to get them to want to call a complete stranger and get a cash offer for a house is, that's not a thing that you just do on a whim. And so just finding that, right? Like just finding that thing. And personally, I guess if you want some really practical thing that I would do, that I even do now, is I love driving for dollars. I really think that that's like a fun way to really learn about your city or where you're investing, finding contractors, because there's a roll-off in the front yard and the front door is wide open, guys are walking in and out. You can get out, talk to them, get their card, see the work they're doing, see how clean they keep the job site. Landlords, you can find all kinds of, you meet people, you learn about the different areas, you find great deals. And I just absolutely enjoy that part of it. And I always did, and I think I always will. Like it's just, it seems like when everybody's trying to do the least amount of work possible and just like order a list and do some mailing where they don't have to touch anything.
Yep.
I think finding those ways produce better deals because most people aren't willing to do that long term.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Doing the thing that, and those things change too. Every year, the crowd goes to direct mail on this particular list and another crowd goes to SEO. There's kind of a herd movement that happens as well. I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning, that you said the key thing is knowing your numbers. And my assumption when I hear that is that this business has sort of a funnel quality where you start at the top and you have to look at a lot of opportunities. You have to turn over a lot of rocks, whether you generate those through leads or whether you do them through direct, driving for dollars yourself. You got to look at a lot at the top that aren't going to work out in order to kind of go to the next step where you might have a warm opportunity, then get from another warm opportunity to something that's actually a house that you can make an offer on. And then from that, you make an offer on a certain number of properties, and maybe 10% of those turn out to be a deal. Is knowing that conversion rate, that kind of the amount of leads you have to look at to get a deal, is that kind of the core practice that you're talking about that most good investors and entrepreneurs use?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you are not doing that and you generate a good amount of leads 1 week or 1 month, and you're like, oh, we kicked butt that month. Last month we kicked butt. We got so many leads. I was so busy looking at stuff, but you're not documenting anything or recording anything. And then the next month, it doesn't feel, because you're going off a feel at that point, right? It doesn't feel like you did as many. You don't really have anything to go off of, right? You just have these feelings that are happening, and it's not a good way to operate things, because what happens with that is those feelings cause you to say something doesn't work or whatever, and to try something different. And then you're chasing the new hot thing every single month or every 2 months, and you don't dial in something, right? You don't find the place that works for you that became dialed in. Because you kept chasing other things because you're going off of feelings. And so if you're documenting the numbers, if you're looking, okay, I'm going to record just even at least how many leads came in from this campaign I did, and how many became appointments, how many became deals. I know that. And so the next week or the next month, whenever things are coming in, I can look at those numbers. I can see reality, right? I'm not making up reality with feelings and different things. I can see reality, and I can see it's improving. And I know I can keep going. But that improvement was small enough to where I wouldn't have noticed it had I not seen those numbers.
Great, 100%. I always equate it, whether it's your lead generation numbers or your rental operating numbers. I always compare it to the movies. I love The Matrix, and where like that scene where Nemo's like looking into the Matrix, and he's in this computer program, and all of a sudden he sees like zeros and ones just like going everywhere. And like to me, that's the ultimate place of an entrepreneur, is somebody who sees their whole business in numbers and is still alive. It's a living thing, it's an organic, creative thing. But the successful people I've seen, and when I'm at my best too, I'm not always at my best, but it's when I really have these forms, these reports. I can see my whole lead generation business on a simple little report. 5 numbers, like
Yeah.
that's it, like that. But it takes some work, man. There's a lot of detail from the simple like when I was doing my very simple version of my lead generation business, just having a piece of paper that I carried around with columns, and I just write down every single lead on that piece of paper. Then I go to the next one, then I go to the next one, all the way up to, if you want to spend more money, I know you're in the software business for, contact, CRMs and things like that. I mean, there's value in these things, but it costs either time and or money to organize yourself that way. It's not easy to have good books, to have good numbers. It takes some effort and some work, but that's what I'm hearing from you, that's one of the key habits that we have if we don't want to deceive ourselves and kind of jump from one thing to another and always be kind of going off a whim instead of actually data that tells you what's going on.
Right. And it has to be, yeah. I mean, whatever you do to keep track of those things has to be something that you can keep doing. And that's the problem that I always had in the past whenever I was trying to tally things up in spreadsheets or just in a notebook. That would be the thing that I would forget to do when I got too many calls and appointments to go look at. I would forget to do something, and it falls apart quickly. And that's really actually one of the big reasons why we even have, Forefront built in the first place, was to have a system that you're keeping track of all your leads in, but it also keeps track of all that stuff automatically, so we don't have to remember to do it or spend a bunch of time pulling together the data to get the numbers, right? It's all in there. Everything that's done in there is just tracked, and then you have a KPI view, a dashboard there to be able to see it. And the best part of that, the thing I like most about it, is when you're looking at a trend of week over week, what those numbers were. You can see what's happening. You can see the change before it becomes a major problem, but you can also see the improvements so that you know that you're on the right track, right? Keep pushing forward. Don't stop and try to find something new that promises the great leads or deals. Everybody's going to promise that with every system, marketing system that's sold. I mean, that's just what you're doing. You're selling a system. Yeah. And but the part about that I like about doing it this way, instead of a spreadsheet, is that it's done, so it'll keep being done because you're not having to manually do it, but that you can actually click on the number and then see the leads that make up that number. So, last week we got 5 appointments. Which ones were they? Well, no need to go search or do anything. You just click the 5 and you see the 5, right? Like there's a lot of power in that. And tracking 27 data points. I mean, there's things like canceled appointments, right? If you start noticing a trend of more canceled appointments, it's time to dig into what's going on.
Right.
Is it us canceling them? Is it the seller? Are we setting these appointments too far out? Like what's going on, right? There's all kinds of tweaks that can happen in your business. And at that point, the beautiful thing that starts happening is that you realize that you don't have to chase new lead sources. You get to the point where you have the business cranking along, where you know your numbers enough to know that it usually takes about this many leads to get this deal, right? And I know that this source is producing this many pretty steadily, and maybe I'll add one more to it or whatever to grow. But that produces a little bit of predictability, right? Because something's not going to drop off a cliff all of a sudden most of the time. It's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, and going back to our kind of one of my original problems that I think a lot of our audience members are having is you're out there in the market, you're competing with a lot of people. This type of system that Danny's talking about and this approach to lead generation and being organized and having your business, looking at it from a business standpoint, not just like a hobby, is really what sets you apart in the market right now. Like if I had to go to 2021, it reminds me so much of 2004, 5, and 6. It's a little bit more competitive, I think, than even then. But the way I competed then was being more organized, was knowing my numbers even better, was zigging when the competition was zagging, like trying a new campaign, doing this, and knowing my numbers. Like there's 95% of the people out there making up this stat, but I'm pretty sure that most investors out there don't know what their numbers are. Like it's just a fact. And so if you want to have a competitive advantage right now, which is what this is all about, then being the person who spends money, yes, on marketing, you're going to have to get outside the MLS, you're going to have to get outside of the kind of normal channels everybody's doing. But then if you can't just throw money at it and expect it to work magic, you've got to have some sort of system, some sort of approach, whether you're a small scale operator, mom and pop, or whether you're trying to get up to 100 deals per year. It's the same method. That's really what I've always appreciated about what you do, Danny, just looking at it from a distance. That's the approach you take. Maybe it's the software engineer kind of thinker in you, but that kind of mindset is really important that I hope people take away from this conversation.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. I think it provides staying power too, right? I mean, it's not just getting in there with the competition, but if the market shifts, you kind of ahead of the curve because you see the shift in your own numbers first. Yep. You don't have to wait for somebody to say it's shifting when it might not even be shifting in your market, right? Like you have to believe other people if you don't have your own stuff to look at.
Yep, no doubt. Very good. Well, Danny, I could keep talking about marketing all day long. So this has been fun. I want to ask you a final question that I always ask all the people on the show is that people who listen to this, they're at some point in their journey to financial independence. Some of them might be brand new, just digging themselves out of debt. Some people might be all the way farther along and have a large net worth, and they're just trying to figure out how to live off that net worth. But the common theme is they're going on a journey. They're doing that call to adventure that you talked about earlier. And so I just wondered if you had a final tip for them based on your own experience, based on the journey they had ahead of them towards building wealth and trying to achieve that financial freedom. Any final tip you'd have for them?
Yeah, the final tip would just be know where you're going. And that doesn't have to be 20 years. I don't know that any of us really fully know where we want to really be in 20 years. But even just like the next 3, having, I think it was Brandon Turner told me about the book Vivid Vision. And that one is it's a quick read. So it's really thin. But it's awesome because what it does is it has you set 3 years out from where you are right now and writing out different areas of your life and what it's supposed to, like what it looks like at this point, as living it as if it's already being lived. Because I think when we don't have our why dialed in, and I think we hear that all the time, but I think the whole vivid vision to me is a lot better than coming up with a why, because if the why is too vague, the idea is there, it doesn't really drive us too much. But if we have a vivid vision written out where when we read it, we're reading it as if it's reality, and then every single weekend you read that, right, you're going to always know where you're headed. And it's going to be so cool to be, because this is already happening for me. Like I'm already, as I read it every weekend, sometimes I'll be like, oh my God, that's already happening. Like that happened 3 times this week, and it's like you start seeing it become, reality. It's just very cool. So that's I think.
Cool. Well, I'll put a link to that book. That's great. I love that idea. Have a vivid vision, go towards it, know the direction you're going in. Great stuff, Danny. So let the people know where they can follow along with you. I know they'll want to stay in touch with you. Anything you got going on you want to tell them about?
Sure. So you can find us on social media at Forefront CRM. Forefront CRM is all the social media things. If you want to contact me directly, you can at danny@forefrontcrm.com. And then also, of course, if you like podcasts, the Braver podcast, it's just called Braver. If you have trouble finding it on iTunes, just go to braver.fm.
Great. Good stuff. It's a fun conversation, Danny. Really glad we connected here and appreciate it. Hope to stay in touch. Thanks again for being here.
All right. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. You can find a link of today's show notes in the podcast description of the episode, either on YouTube or your podcast player. And if you're new here, please consider hitting the subscription button on your favorite podcast player or on YouTube so that you'll be notified each Monday morning with the newest episode. This is also the part of the show where I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, to one person who recently left a review for the podcast. This week's winner goes by the username Frugal T on Apple Podcast. It was left on April 28th, 2021, and the review goes like this. Fantastic real estate investing, financial independence podcast. What a great podcast. I've learned so much from Coach Carson about how to use real estate investing to develop passive income streams so I can focus on doing what matters. Carson's emphasis on finding out what is enough is spot on and really refreshing in a world where you're conditioned to always pursue more. So thank you so much for that review, Frugal T. If you'll send an email to podcast@coachcarson.com, I'll be happy to get you a copy of the book, Retire Early with Real Estate. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risk. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and I'm your host for the Real Estate and Financial Independence podcast, which is all about helping you invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do more of what matters. See you next time.